When you become too deep, he no longer has the courage to stay. You will think of her, the woman who feels everything too deeply. She doesn't just love, she sees into love. She doesn't just speak, she reveals. And when she stands before a man, she does not offer him a mask, but a mirror. That is where it begins. You will think of her, or perhaps, you are her. Have you ever wondered why a man seems drawn to your light only to retreat when he glimpses the shadows behind it? Why he is mesmerized at first by your mind, your stillness, your depth, and then, almost without warning, begins to disappear? It is not because you are too much. It is because you are too real. Most men are not prepared to meet the feminine that has integrated her darkness. They crave the warmth of the sun, but not the wisdom of the night. They are enchanted by beauty, but terrified of truth. They say they want an awakened woman, but what they truly mean is, someone who can save me without making me face myself. But a woman who has met her own pain will never rescue a man from his. She is not the mother of his broken boy, nor the sanctuary of his unhealed ego. She is a storm that asks him to rise, to grow, to die to the smallness he once mistook for identity. And that, right there, is where he hesitates. Because to love a deep woman is to confront your reflection in her gaze, unfiltered, unedited, and utterly raw. It's to stand naked before your own unconscious, stripped of pretense. Her love isn't soft illusion, it's initiation. It doesn't comfort the ego, it dissolves it. He begins to feel the walls closing in, not because she has trapped him, but because his unexamined self can no longer breathe in the atmosphere of truth. You see, when a woman has done her shadow work, she vibrates at a frequency that unsettles the superficial. She no longer flatters the false self, no longer apologizes for her intensity, no longer hides her boundaries behind charm. She has stopped playing small to earn affection. Her silence carries more power than another woman's approval. And in that silence, something profound happens. The man feels himself shrinking. Not because she belittles him, but because the mask he's worn begins to crumble in the presence of her authenticity. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation requires courage, and most flee before the fire. So he leaves, not because she is too deep, but because he cannot yet swim. He leaves because the woman who has met her darkness cannot be manipulated through guilt. She sees the pattern before it unfolds, the wound before it's weaponized. Her love is conscious, and consciousness exposes everything that was once hidden. It's not rejection he feels, but revelation. He realizes that love with her demands more than romance, it demands evolution. And yet, she does not chase. She does not beg for him to understand. She knows that depth is not a performance, it's a presence. And presence cannot be negotiated. If he returns, it will not be because she pulled him back, but because he finally chose to meet himself. But for now, she stands in the quiet aftermath, feeling the ache that only self-awareness brings, the ache of knowing that sometimes, the price of being whole is being alone. She walks through that pain like a priestess through sacred fire, not to destroy herself, but to burn away all illusion. Each tear that falls baptizes her deeper into truth. Because there is a certain kind of loneliness reserved for the woman who has grown beyond the games, a sacred solitude that few can understand. But it is in this solitude that she becomes untouchable, not because she has hardened, but because she has remembered who she is. She no longer confuses chaos for passion, or inconsistency for connection. She has learned that real intimacy is not found in intensity, but in safety, and that safety begins within. The world may call her too much, but she smiles, for she knows that too much is often just code for more than they can handle. And so she carries her depth like a crown, not a curse. She has outgrown the need to prove her worth to those who cannot see it. Because the deep woman doesn't drown, she teaches others how to breathe. He will remember her in fragments. In the sound of rain hitting the window. In the way silence can feel like both a wound and a sanctuary. He will remember the way she looked at him, not as a man to be fixed, but as a soul to be seen. And that terrified him. Because being seen is the closest thing to being stripped bare. For the deep woman does not fall in love with surfaces. She sees through gestures, through charm, through the practiced calm of a man who hides his trembling beneath confidence. She can feel the tremor of his fears, the weight of his disappointments, the unspoken wars inside his chest. And for a moment, he loves her for it, until he realizes he cannot hide anymore. That is when love becomes confrontation. A deep woman doesn't ask, "Who are you?" She asks, "Who are you pretending not to be?" She doesn't demand affection, she demands presence. Her energy calls out the truth in others, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, depending on how far they've run from themselves. And for a man who has built his identity around avoidance, her love feels like danger. Not because she intends harm, but because her light exposes what he thought he had buried. He cannot bear her gaze for too long, it feels like a mirror held too close to his face. So he begins to retreat, slowly at first, through silence, through distraction, through the subtle withdrawal of warmth. He tells himself he needs space, but what he truly needs is escape. Not from her, but from the reflection of his own limitations. He may tell others, "She was too emotional, too complicated." But beneath those words is an unspoken confession, "She was everything I wasn't ready to become." And she, the woman who has lived many lifetimes within her own heart, does not chase what resists awakening. She does not plead with the unready. She knows that a man who fears her depth will only ever love her fragments. She has learned that love without depth is starvation. In her silence, she begins to return to herself. She touches the edges of her pain like one traces the rim of a chalice, reverently, deliberately. She knows that grief is not the enemy, it is the echo of meaning. There is something sacred in the heartbreak of a deep woman. Because she does not numb it. She lets it teach her. She understands that every relationship is a classroom, and every departure, a lesson in detachment. Her heart breaks, yes, but it breaks open, not closed. For the deep feminine is not destroyed by loss. She is refined by it. There is a wordless wisdom in her now. She realizes that not every man is meant to walk beside her. Some are only meant to awaken what she has forgotten, to remind her that her depth is not a weakness, but a calling. When she loved him, she touched his soul. But when he left, she touched her own. And something shifts inside her, quietly, but irrevocably. She stops searching for someone to meet her at her depth and begins to build a life that honors it. No longer does she wait for someone to understand her. She understands herself. This is the path of individuation, the journey Jung spoke of, where the soul must integrate both the light and the shadow, both the longing and the loss. She realizes now that love was never meant to complete her, only to reveal her. In solitude, she begins to see the outline of her essence returning. The laughter that once depended on him now rises unprovoked. The tenderness that once sought his approval now pours back into her own being. The divine feminine reclaims herself not by closing her heart, but by owning it. For depth is not about how much you feel, but how fearlessly you face what you feel. And this woman has faced it all, the abandonment, the misunderstanding, the ache of being too deep for those still living in the shallow end. She becomes the embodiment of a quiet revolution, one that whispers, "I will no longer dim myself to be loved by those afraid of the dark." Because the truth is, when a woman has met herself, no man's departure can unmake her. She becomes the mountain, still, vast, and unmoved, while the winds of uncertainty howl around her. And though he may never return, a part of him will always know, he once stood before something divine, and he turned away. There comes a moment, subtle, almost imperceptible, when the ache transforms. It no longer feels like a wound, but a memory that has surrendered its sharpness. The deep woman begins to breathe differently. Her exhale no longer trembles. Her eyes, once heavy with searching, now hold a calm that no longer waits for understanding. Something in her soul begins to unclench. The truth she once resisted now becomes her liberation. Not everyone is meant to meet her where she stands. Some were only meant to awaken the sleeping parts of her, the ones that mistook intensity for love, attention for connection, and longing for destiny. In the quiet of her own company, she begins to see clearly that what she called love was often projection. The Jungian truth emerges: she had not fallen for the man himself, but for the mirror he offered to her own unconscious. She had loved the parts of herself she saw reflected in him, her tenderness, her fire, her hope, her shadow. He was the vessel through which her psyche sought reunion with what it had exiled. And now, without him, she stands before the fragments of her own soul, not broken, but scattered, waiting to be reclaimed. It is in this space, this sacred solitude, that individuation truly begins. She learns that love was never meant to save her, nor was it meant to save him. Love, in its truest form, is an alchemical process. It burns away the false identities until only essence remains. It strips away illusion until both lovers stand before their own reflection, unarmored. Most never make it that far. Most turn away before the transformation completes. But she does not turn away. She looks directly into the heart of her loneliness and whispers, "Show me what's here." And what she finds is not despair, but depth. In the silence, she begins to notice the symphony of small things, the sound of wind moving through leaves, the way her breath feels like a prayer, the warmth of sunlight touching her skin. She starts to realize that wholeness was never something to be found in another, it was always the quiet hum beneath her ribs, waiting to be remembered. The more she surrenders, the more she becomes untethered from the need for validation. Her worth is no longer a question, but a fact written into her being. She no longer seeks eyes that see her, because she has already learned to witness herself. And as she integrates her shadow, the part of her that once begged, once doubted, once feared being too much, she begins to see that these were not flaws but unhealed echoes. Each was a messenger, asking to be held, not hidden. This is the paradox of the deep feminine: her power lies in her softness, her courage in her surrender. She no longer needs to defend her depth, because she has stopped apologizing for it. Meanwhile, somewhere in the distance of her past, he begins to feel the weight of her absence. Not the absence of a woman, but the absence of reflection. He no longer has someone who sees beyond his mask, who calls him to rise. And in that emptiness, he feels the faint, unshakable pull of his own unfulfilled potential. He begins to realize that the woman he feared was never his enemy, she was his teacher. Her depth was not a demand, it was an invitation. But one must be brave to accept such invitations. The deep woman does not wait for him to return. She has no desire to be worshipped, only to be met. And if he should ever come back, it will not be to the same woman he left. For she has outgrown the version of herself that once needed his understanding. She now belongs to herself, fiercely, fully, and without apology. This is what it means to rise from within. To meet one's own gaze and not look away. To be both the question and the answer. Because the woman who has become too deep no longer asks, "Why did he leave?" She asks instead, "What did his leaving reveal?" And in that question, she finds peace. Her heart, once a battlefield, becomes a temple. Her silence, once heavy with longing, becomes a sanctuary. She has not lost, she has evolved. For when you descend into the dark and return with light, you no longer seek warmth from fleeting fires. You become the flame. There is a beauty that only comes after the breaking, the kind that cannot be manufactured, only earned. It is the quiet radiance of a woman who has walked through her own darkness and come out luminous. Her eyes no longer beg to be understood, they understand. Her presence no longer clings, it simply is. In the stillness of her evolution, she begins to realize that love was never lost, it only changed form. What once was longing becomes awareness. What once was pain becomes wisdom. And what once was fear becomes freedom. The woman who has become too deep carries her history not as chains, but as jewelry, each scar a reminder of the truths she has survived. She no longer flinches at her reflection. The shadows that once haunted her now walk beside her, tamed and integrated. This is the essence of shadow work, to look at one's own darkness not with judgment, but with compassion. To see that even the parts that once self-sabotaged, once settled, once stayed too long, were never villains, only lost fragments seeking love. And so she forgives herself. Not in a moment of dramatic release, but quietly, in the rhythm of her days, in the way she pours coffee, or tends to her plants, or laughs without checking who's listening. Forgiveness becomes her second nature. Because now she knows, healing is not an event. It's a devotion. And devotion, the truest kind, is not about another person. It's about presence. The willingness to stay with oneself through every rising and falling wave, through every shadow that surfaces to be seen. She begins to see that life itself has always been her lover, constantly reflecting, challenging, caressing, and awakening her. Every encounter, every heartbreak, every silence was love in disguise, calling her back home to herself. Meanwhile, the world continues to spin in its familiar haste. People still chase distractions, still barter authenticity for acceptance. But she moves differently now. She moves like someone who has remembered the rhythm of the soul. Her boundaries are no longer walls, they are thresholds. Only those who come with reverence may enter. She no longer seeks intensity, she seeks resonance. The difference is everything. Intensity burns and fades. Resonance endures, steady, aligned, real. She becomes a mirror for those who cross her path. Some find themselves comforted by her calm, others, unsettled by it. For when a person has found peace within, they unconsciously expose the restlessness in others. But she does not adjust her frequency anymore. She has learned that those meant for her will find her by vibration, not persuasion. There is no longer a need to prove, perform, or explain. Her presence itself is her truth. And in that presence, there is power, the kind of power that does not dominate but liberates. Because when a woman has descended into her own underworld and returned whole, she becomes ungovernable. The opinions of others lose their grip. The cycles of approval and rejection no longer dictate her worth. She becomes what the ancients once called Sophia, wisdom embodied, divine feminine realized. There is a sacred rebellion in her now. Not loud, but unyielding. A quiet refusal to betray herself ever again for the comfort of belonging. And if love comes again, as it inevitably will, she will not approach it from hunger, but from wholeness. She will not say, "Complete me," but "Walk with me." She will not cling to permanence, for she knows that everything changes, and that real love does not seek to possess, only to flow. When she loves again, it will be from abundance, not absence. Because now she knows that depth is not a danger, it is destiny. She is no longer afraid of being too deep. The right man will not drown, he will dive. Until then, she remains at peace. Rooted, radiant, real. The world might call her mysterious, but there is no mystery. There is only presence, a woman who has met every version of herself and chosen to stay. And in that staying, she has become eternal. Because when you become too deep, the ones without courage will leave, but those who remain will meet you in the soul. The woman who has embraced her own depths no longer needs to chase, to explain, or to prove. She has already become what she was seeking all along. And so the story ends where it began, in her. The deep woman. The mirror. The fire. The peace. The woman who understands her worth does not chase, she chooses.